Jamgön Kongtrül Lodrö Thaye Dene taje saje darsen yenden luzo yaze tu ko chundra chodan chuni jin dagle mesen jambe yon la de zenen cheje chenra özre che dale demo men barasrene Gadan den jue jong loi do fa ye lo zhe po ben nong wa ye zao du so gang ge tu je sre che da wa tam je nam pong ba den jian zhen zhong den ba kan ko dam de la da sha ca Jamgön Kongtrül Lodrö Thaye Yibo Deva Nambarasar Namge Khenpo Sambai Kundu Zon Yeve Seshin Jelon Gusha Tsarab Kundu Sije Tangye Le Tamge Samu Shagi Yong Zon Shin Shanchub Nyembu Lomgen Karma Pa Meshe Debe Jiwe Tsuge Lasso tene samba shongchup chodo tukje parambache saltamne chösenro nang.
So please begin by generating the precious body mind, and with that as your basis, listen attentively to the teachings that will be given.
Bana ta chö singende simbe kabla nganso kunlong tang kunche chö ne chö singende yingure songbi bate.
It is explained that when one attends teachings, listening to explanations of various Buddhist topics, one needs to correct oneself, as it were, both with respect to one's motivation for attending the teaching or teachings, as well as one's behavior, one's conduct.
Penna choose shuik kabla kunung to candidate go yorsana. That tebatumu want to tana, Corwan the Dunachana, Yin Bachi, Hakoache, Dille, Tarbe Tap, Chek Nye, and Tambe choosing it. Yin, Tambe choosing it, Dige, then don't the chick into Drugu, some much go.
So, in terms of attending teachings and one's motivation in this regard, in all Buddhist traditions, you have two main ones. Each has subdivisions, however, there are two main ones, Theravada Buddhism and Mahayana Buddhism. In both, it is taught that when one is in the progress of engaging in Buddhist studies, motivation-wise, one needs to have, to some degree, understood that worldly existences are of the nature of suffering. Having seen this, one has resolved to practice the path to liberation from continuous rebirth in those existences. And in terms of doing just that, one has also resolved to engage in the path to liberation according to the principles of that path.
Tene rani tepa chimbyo gor shupachi yin teching ge chö nyamne nangkin ji yin shin samna tang tang te tene shanchup sem rinpoche ge zi samba sumate.
If we look at Mahayana Buddhism in specific, a person who has entered this path needs to, in order to be able to practice this path, generate the precious Bodhi mind, the mindset which takes enlightenment as its goal for the sake of becoming able to benefit all sentient beings. So the so-called Bodhi mind, that mindset is to be the very basis of a practitioner, or the very basis for a practitioner of Mahayana Buddhism.
Tinde shanjup jisem sengente yang pena sewa ninje shimbu si simbege samnachil segeyo te sedu roan nang kata nyambe semjin tsang tserab ne rang tang delwa jangjang rediyo nga tsu korban di nang la thoma mebi tuyne tanda pada dedirwa pa che nyungke ma che nyungke tenda mandarwa yo mare tenso la ling dong namin la merebi tsewa chip go yo.
The Bodhi mind is primarily, or one of its perspectives, is concerned with loving kindness and so-called great compassion. Great compassion in that the Bodhi mind includes all sentient beings in number as vast as the sky. In terms of the practitioner, wanting to accomplish their welfare, the welfare of each and every sentient being without a single exception. Now, in terms of focusing on all sentient beings, one should, for the sake of understanding what is meant here, consider the principle of reincarnation, the fact that I myself and all other sentient beings have taken rebirth in various worldly existences continually since time immemorial. And all sentient beings throughout this immense time span, as it were, have acted as a parent, a sibling, and so on, and assisted one and shown one great kindness, not in just one but many lives. Therefore, all of them deserve one's kindness with respect to them and one's compassion for them. That should be a given. Selfless compassion for all sentient beings. Selfless in that the individual's mindset is not tainted by selfish concerns in terms of hopes of reward and so on in return for kindness to others. So this kind of loving kindness makes for the practitioner wanting to benefit all those beings. Now, in order to be able to selflessly accomplish the welfare of others, one needs to work on oneself to begin with. The regular worldly mindset, on the basis of that mindset, one isn't truly able to accomplish the welfare of others. So one needs to correct one's mindset so that one's efforts and intentions in terms of accomplishing the welfare of others happen on the basis of selfless loving kindness for all those beings. So, in order to accomplish this, the practitioner needs to understand that he has to make changes regarding himself, primarily his mindset. A shift has to happen, or perhaps many shifts have to happen in terms of the development of the individual practitioner for the sake of truly giving rise to selfless loving kindness and compassion for others. And the practitioner needs to understand that as a regular worldly individual, he isn't able to guide others to liberation from continuous rebirths in various worldly existences. In order to be able to guide others in this way, he needs to attain Buddha, the enlightened state himself to begin with. Because as an enlightened individual, he will have the capacity to do so. As a regular worldly individual, he won't have that capacity. And so, for the sake of accomplishing this, the practitioner resolves to study the Buddha Dharma, reflect upon its meaning, and then apply what he has understood in this way, in terms of him practicing the path to enlightenment. Chödrak de samlo tang tene karase. Digi la kan sung sung.
Sanji kompon dugge tembege sambat go yodes.
So in brief, it's about fostering the intention to attain enlightenment for the sake of others, not for one's own personal sake or welfare, but for the sake of becoming able to truly accomplish the welfare of others.
Thoman ni to rangi kunhung te jö mato eche kunhung tella
Det che matona.
te che mato eche kunhung tella rondun yishi je towa jinjar shona.
Det gör ju bara att köka magen.
Jaza rondun yishi je towa jinjar shone chöbi nyamne tombo kande ji jegi yo samna te chö song yo ma. Benna chödu shakchin kar nyamne na.
Now, if one isn't able to foster that intention truly, honestly and truly, it means that in terms of one's mindset, whatever one does, in terms of studies, reflection and meditation, the basis for those actions is the worldly mindset. And therefore, no matter how advanced the methods one may use are, methods such as the 6 doctrines systematized or compiled by the Indian Buddhist master Naropa or Mahamudra, even though one may engage in the practice, studies, reflection and practice of those methods, the highest as it were, in terms of Mahayana Buddhism, enlightenment can't be achieved, and therefore selfless loving kindness and compassion for others cannot happen. Why? Because studies, reflection and meditation practice, their basis is the worldly mindset. And with that basis, enlightenment simply cannot be attained. That's why it's so important to foster the proper intentions and to correct oneself in terms of one's mindset, because otherwise progress simply cannot be made.
That ndege kunhung te thoma ni ne jögö tsu höla tarbe yupa mera kaseji yobina changme de song gyo re bana yongdong bönge yang de garang song gyo re.
Now, tanda shishabare.
Yeah, kunhung jögö gre sen.
What was said here in terms of correcting one's mindset is taught by all Tibetan Buddhist schools and traditions, as well as the indigenous religion of Tibet, the Pen tradition. All explain what was just explained regarding what a practitioner needs to do at the outset of the path, namely to correct his worldly mindset and make a change for the better by way of truly generating the body-mind. So this is how the path is to start out. This is to be done at the very beginning of the path, because, as was just explained, otherwise studies, contemplation and meditation will bear no fruit. These practices will not yield results.
Rang ju la takje tang ne chöten ji so yong de thoma nge kunung kanden du di kunung de thoma ya ko ji yuan ya phar tu chö yin de be ka la kunung de nyomong don je short du dan men du je short du na jesim je yema min je ma shor che ge sam thoma ne thama
yöna jesem ke
jesim je 다 제마체 마셔라 셰그 템베 담잖아 다 탐에게 파르돌라 고노송고티 연투 툼도나 랑랑 가와체 아체 다른 최전데 고노송 장고치 게네 휴주종 삼 된대지 집해 봐이나 최천이 셰바들라양 개와 시루지 여대 없어. 니차나.
Yeah. So a practitioner therefore needs to take a good look at himself in terms of his motivation for example, attending a teaching. To look at his mindset, in particular his motivation for attending the teaching in question, to figure out if he has generated the proper motivation in terms of attending the teaching. If he finds that he hasn't, to some extent, generated selfless loving kindness and compassion for others, if he finds that he lacks in terms of this motivation, he needs to correct himself. And react to this by way of regretting his own failure, as it were. That, well, he's just sitting there, listening, with his regular worldly mindset. An actual shift hasn't happened. So if he finds that this is the case, there should be regret regarding that failure and the resolve to counteract the tendencies of his worldly mindset and replace the worldly mindset with a true intention to selflessly benefit others. And if the person who looks into his mindset at the beginning of the teaching finds that he has been able to some extent generate the proper motivation in terms of attending the teaching, he should then rejoice in the fact that this time around he hasn't failed with respect to the true intention that is to be fostered. And he can also give thought to the fact that if, or when rather, he attends the teaching with or on the basis of the body-mind, then both he and the person who teaches have successfully interacted, so that there will be benefit resulting from the person who explains his work in explaining and the work of the listener who listens on the basis of the body-mind. That is a proper setting for communicating the Buddha Dharma, and that in itself is a good result, a success as it were, that will contribute to progress for the practitioner and contribute to perhaps the spreading of the true Buddha Dharma. Det menar det kanske njena.
Det kanske njena. Jirtang chö njembe pyön da yung reba de. Yin en pyön lap chenpo de yung tuwe kakpore.
Now, if the opposite holds true, namely that the individual who listens or the individuals who listen, whatever is the case, haven't given rise to the proper intention, that is to say the body-mind, one simply just listens, then the work of, or rather, the work involved in communicating the Buddha Dharma will not yield great results in terms of development for practitioners and therefore benefit for others. Det Shinyan Nietzsche gör det, va? Där det yang shaken la kogo gremare det. Of course, the true intention, the proper motivation, the body-mind, holds true for the person who explains the Dharma as well. So, if both haven't generated the body-mind truly, then the work involved with explaining and the effort involved in listening, both or neither will yield a result really. Of course, it's virtuous to listen, it's virtuous to voice the words of the Buddha Dharma. However, in the absence of the body-mind, a great result will not ensue. It's a virtuous situation, however, a result for the good of all won't happen, as it were. On the other hand, if both the listeners and the person, the spiritual guide who explains the Buddha Dharma to the members of the audience, if all involved have truly given rise to the Bodhi mind, then
Rinpoche Mongpo Yongso Gongne Sangye le Pulwa Lechang Du Nime Kaga Chö Sholoka Jigli Chenyi Chebe Pingyuan de Chö Chenyi Chebe Pingyuan de Che Songre.
And here Khenpo Rinpoche quotes Buddha Shakyamuni, who, as is recorded in many sutras, said that to communicate the Buddha Dharma, to teach the Buddha Dharma, where the spiritual guide is an individual who has truly given rise to the Bodhi mind, and where the members of the audience are individuals who have also truly given rise to the Bodhi mind, the merit of that event is far greater, in particular when the event happens in a degenerate era. The result of that event, the merit of it, is far greater than if a person were to fill our universe with precious substances and offer that to all Buddhas. The event from communicating or making the Buddha Dharma available on the basis of the Bodhi mind and those being taught, also having generated the Bodhi mind, that the merit of that event has a much greater impact merit-wise than if an individual were to fill this whole world with precious substances, rubies, diamonds, sapphires, and the like, and make an offering of that to all Buddhas.
Pena Tendek Rinpoche Tenza Puna, Ngal Sonam, Lapoche Zogrova. Sonam Zogrova. Sonam Saviore, the Yen Yang, Church Chenny Seven, Sonam de Yongyo, they carry resena.
Now, some people may wonder what's the reason for this, namely that it's more meritorious or virtuous to be part of an event such as the one described. That's far more meritorious than offering all those precious substances to all Buddhas. What's the reason for the event being more meritorious? The event based in the true Bodhi mind.
Benna, Shersin, Dorje, and Dole Song Yuba. The Yin Shepe, Dong Yong Sun the Jeb and Juro Song Yuba.
The Yin Shepe.
Dong, the Yin Shepe, Regut and Namyam, Machevich Hagiores.
Well, the answer you find in the Diamond Sutra. And in there, it is explained that by way of such an event, which takes place on the universal Bodhi mind, in that all involved have truly given rise to the Bodhi mind. By way of that, namely truly generating the Bodhi mind, the ancestral line of all Tathagatas are upheld, is preserved. And that in itself is far greater than offering that massive amount of precious substances.
Penna Sanje ki kirap tenzole che zebe yina yang. Nime tula cho shola ka chik ge shwe tondu yang Sanje ki udong udang yina le jimba tang ne tendres chen zundu zam yorwa.
Ti kosong di
dire penna Sanje ki
shloka chik de drelna
penna Sanje ki ta Sanje kona chongchup chod sem jebe mishirwa. Sem jebe metege
o Chödrak da sang ye me na yang changchup sempa
ya chongchup cheba lab kap. Chö sholoka chik jeti kamla ne tube che do korang kuzuk la mame tong phu yorwa. Karsan dan de dere lo jugna la tonsong chi ge duje tamje meta ko saje tamje dunga wa se chö ge dam che de kwe she yor.
duje tamche mipta
Pa saje tamje dung lawa
sakche tamche donga ba de rangsong de gi shege ore
she yor. Temen dan jikten na sanje chö nupchar
o kalbanga ma chi
kabang hama chil.
da rangsong de gi ngon la yo bei sangye de ki tsik koran shege ore chengge ore
chengge yor.
sangye de jelyo sarwa
인제 요 통수 다 되게 세게 여봐 sonza sonje 코란 티까 jarbo지 그 있죠 렌도 샹지도 봐
o de gi kapsu da sangye me bei du chikla
렌도
de sangye gyalpore
jar보
gyalpo gi keba shere
제
sugi sangye re de
다스 가방함 그 sonje 지 가빈게로 갈반디난 렘도 갈방함함 기직제
라서
대예 갑라 다인다 산제기 춘지 때는 너무 로고야와 산제기 동디 체로요
동 체도wen
디갑라 콘 jarbo지 그 있죠와 예네 다 최저 남침부 이제의 신king 대 제의 통송대
gyalpo de chögi dam chempushi sere
jarbote게 다 최신king 통송지 배봐 저 요에서 다 그런
o
고아로
amcho kore
암쪽 콘텐 통송의 체제
o chongsong ge se
통송대 통송 야구지 요사 말해
tene da me patang den so yang shege orbe
다대 최지 남이에 생기더라와
re che de song song da du che tam che mi ta pa na sak che tam che dunga wa
최탐제 동신 다음에 봐
tong shi da me tene
양에는 대봐 시와
shika shege ore
시가시기 그 납시기
laso lab shege
이 납시기
ngoma shege
뭐마디 시기
da kane sheshi
칸네 납시 맞주는 신체 마 내서 만든다
laso
납시기 제자 다때 시기 여봐도 학원의 열보되게 콘츠 덴덴슈 다 덴덴슈는 다 최대 제가 날 라브로치스 슈유사
laso
동선 되게 삼나타네 다 최내 랍초스 쳐 얘는 안에 유연 카르테게 있으나 연치를 야식거나게 퓨스라고 되네 동성의 가사 쳐체네 다 동부처럼 르즈포텔라 이공부네 마르메 동tra지 포르크스 땡에 셰게스라고 다 That Johnson Koran question Roger and Jessie the net that would have changed. Did that say okay, Medo Cheram? Then the canter marmot don't try to put in the rest of Chödrak and Yeron. Come sorrow she like Machon song, John Joseph.
Caramajo?
Sorrow, Mrs. Zerma to it and the Kayam Machon song.
Chongshuk Sampamara, Sanje Chikrava.
Sandy Marie, Jean Joseph, Shalta to a Jean Joseph. Yar would Shalta to be Jera Brezeba.
Okay.
Then it comes on to get lovely to Kanga.
Chigidanchi.
Oh, then Yawachim but to get church at Damjet, you get a tree net, then Korang but Casa Kali, you get a jarne, Tandi and our son Tangshoson, Tendechevery. Penna, take a Kunkalba Munguson and so those songs.
Now, there is an event from one of the lifetimes of Buddha Shakyamuni prior to his enlightenment, when he was on the path of a bodhisattva. Now, which would explain why the event of properly giving teachings and the event of properly receiving teachings is more meritorious than offering a massive amount of precious substances to the Buddhas. And as was said, the Daimon Sutra explains that this is exactly what Buddha Shakyamuni said. And the reason for explaining this or informing those interested of this is that the effect of properly explaining just one shloka, that effect has a much greater impact than offering a massive amount of valuable precious stones to the Buddhas, simply because that will make for the Buddha Dharma remaining in the world impacting and inspiring those interested in the Buddha Dharma. So contributing to preserving the Buddha Dharma properly is far greater than an offering, a material offering of high value. And there is then an example which illustrates this from one of the lives prior to Buddha Shakyamuni's enlightenment, where he engaged in the path of a bodhisattva. Now, this was at a time when the Buddha Dharma was no longer available in the world. It had declined to the point that the only person in the world who had knowledge of what the previous Buddha had taught, knew of the 4 lines which sum up the meaning of an entire Buddha, of a Buddha's entire doctrine, namely that all compounded phenomena are impermanent, and all things tainted by the workings of the world give rise to suffering, or are of the nature of suffering. And in fact, all things are empty of a real reality. All things lack a self-entity, and nirvana is a state of absolute peace. These four statements, being part of the doctrine of a previous Buddha, were known by a rishi who lived at the same time as the bodhisattva who later on in a future life was to become known as Buddha Shakyamuni, and who at the time was born as the king of the country where this rishi lived. Now, the rishi, not being a Buddhist, knew of these four statements that the previous Buddha had made, and he was the only one in the entire world who had any memory of what the previous Buddha had said at all. However, the rishi wasn't really interested in the meaning of the four statements, but when the king, who had a natural inclination to re-establish the Buddha Dharma in the world, approached him, asking him or requesting him to recount these statements and somewhat elucidate them to him, he said yes. But what do I get in return? Well, the king said, you can have my kingdom. So that's the extent to which the king valued the possibility of receiving teachings of the Buddha Dharma that had now been lost. Because by acquiring knowledge of them, contemplating them and so on, these statements, he knew that the result of doing so would preserve the presence of the Buddha Dharma in the world. Once knowledge of those statements were gone altogether, there would be just a dark era where no one, absolutely no one, had any knowledge, not even an intellectual knowledge of that a previous Buddha had spoken these four statements. So for the sake of preventing that from happening, the king simply offered the rishi his kingdom. Said, you can have my kingdom. And the rishi apparently wasn't a very holy or nice man, though the Sanskrit word rishi, or name or title rishi, approximately means holy man. However, there are people with titles of this kind who may not be holy, and he was one of those, it appears. Now, the rishi arrived at the royal court. He was invited by the king to explain the four statements to him. And the rishi had pledged to do so in return for the kingdom. However, he didn't really have a good knowledge of the meaning of these statements, and he didn't care much about anything regarding this situation but getting the kingdom, becoming the ruler of the kingdom. And so cunningly he told the king, well, for me to give these to you, you really have to prove that you're serious in terms of me explaining these statements to you. Therefore, or in order to prove that, you will have to make cut out small openings on your skin, large enough, 1,000 of them, large enough for a wick and some oil to be put in, and then we'll light all these 1,000 offerings of light, which will be on your body, which will be your offering to me, for the sake of showing that you honestly want these teachings and that you're serious. Perhaps, Khenpo Rinpoche says, though the scriptures do not state that, but perhaps the rishi had thought, well, he'll never survive that, and then I'll just take over the kingdom, and there is no explanation or explaining on my part to the king, because it might be that he couldn't explain very much at all. However, that's sort of speculation, but that's a possibility in terms of why the rishi demanded this. Anyway, this is exactly what the king did. All the 1,000 little wicks were lighted on his body and burnt down, and the king survived, and apparently the king wasn't affected by having done this. Remember, he was in this lifetime a highly developed bodhisattva, presumably on a high level of realization, and was therefore able to survive this, what we would call ordeal, but which to him was just a stepping stone in terms of an effort to preserve there being a presence of the Buddha Dharma in the world. And the rishi then voiced the 4 statements and perhaps gave some explanations. We do not know, the story doesn't tell those details. Tene gyalpo tamanga makara.
Tamanga gyalpo ke tenso kanga yiger tiine. De Koran ke jakap de kasa khale tramchene. Ta chöji damchimbo yete mirap ni sungren netuba shongyo.
And in effect, the king had the 4 statements which sum up the true meaning of the entire Buddhist doctrine, printed and posted all over his country, and in effect of his efforts in this regard, the Buddha-Dharma's presence remained for another 2 or 3 generations in that country.
Tiyinde perna kunhungte kongis semchen thamche marik member cell
Semchen or marik member cell
sertu bachi dan semchen thamche don Koran sang get to be kunhungte kyöchene lekat level.
And the king engaged in all of this for the sake of eradicating the darkness of the ignorance of all sentient beings. That was his reason for all of this.
Did none well then, Sanje Konang Somebody. Kung Kalba Trip Gugusonum Sote, Galetin Ditch Dabble than the Sai in
And Buddha Shakyamuni later on explained that in that lifetime, because of this event and my efforts in this regard, I accumulated merit corresponding I accumulated massive merit corresponding to what would otherwise have required 9 eons of meritorious... 90,000 eons of efforts.
Chazan, that Sanjan Rabbit getting dragging top to Menayang, not so good
So his true intention, his selfless intention here, in terms of what was just explained, what happened, we can then understand that an effort of this kind, based in the true intention to benefit others, the selfless intention to benefit others, is far greater than offering a massive amount of valuable, precious substances, for example. So, from this we can understand that to correct oneself in terms of one's motivation for attending a teaching, contemplating the meaning of what one has heard, and doing meditation practice, it is rather imperative to correct oneself, to see to that one practices to some degree at least on the basis of a proper motivation. For example,
dan Chödrak Rinpoche ikka ge tsawe lama te Khenpo ngakchung shukhe tere. Da Khenpo ngakchung shukhe te wane dzogpa chimbo tokpa tashtu je songwa peme lama zhangma ji yin se ge yoche ngon she tokpa mimshi. Kab tedu nge Khenpo doje le chö ji song ro nang si shu yin de Khenpo doje chö song song chö se sum gren le kon hong chö go be lo ju de song song.
Now, Khenpo Rinpoche gives an example from his own life in terms of illustrating just how important the right motivation is. Khenpo Rinpoche, at the age of 17, while visiting Bhutan, met with a Buddhist master of that time by the name Khenpo Lodrö, who was a friend in the Dharma, that is to say, a co-practitioner, a member of the same group as Chödrak Rinpoche. And their root guru was the well-known Tibetan Mahasiddha Khenpo Ngakchung, who was considered to have attained in that life the highest level of realization regarding what is known as Mahā'ati. he on many occasions apparently demonstrated that he had obtained very unusual qualities such as unobstructed foreknowledge and so on and so forth. Now, Khenpo, meeting with Khenpo Dorje, requested a teaching from him. And Khenpo Dorje responded in the positive. And Khenpo Dorje, during that teaching, spent, to begin with, 3 hours explaining the importance of correcting the worldly mindset to the extent where one, to some degree at least, if not altogether, one generates the proper motivation for listening to the teaching. The body mind, that is. So Khenpo Dorje spent 3 hours explaining this. Dorje Selemare?
Senna Dorje Selere. Tell Loju are Khenpo Rinpoche Kundun, Konambaso, Shakuzi, Hugh de Dieu. Kung Zamba can get Zoro years
already.
Neshuba. Nanga Sani Saya Zambate, Me Danga, Menon, some Tisamadan Devi Sunk. The in a con and drop a chicken Mardo Dodge Stage on 10 years. Sani Mart Sago Sarava, Tendel Samatan, day in there, Tika Khenpo Rinpoche the Yasho Sung those children to it. Jarring them. Chuzamba the Sanin Dong Matale Sung those and Dong Atat Sung those. The Tatachan the Kanga Shuins. Church should got a good home to Deche at the Norris. That general Marti Chemage Pushapaya with Chida, Sajuk Galemion, some Ganan Jones, Kurik Zamba Nan Jones. Then tell the Shapatama, Che Marion Dog Chubby Puyente. Tis sonum get double then, eh? Not missing the number, though Shimri, Shimza sat to a chason song to Penna. Pins and get Lamson Mungre song to.
Now, Khenpo Dorje, during these 3 hours, gave an example from his own lifetime in order to illustrate the importance of the proper motivation. He said, you know, my real name is not just Dorje. My actual name, given to me by my master, is Greedy Dorje. So Khenpo Rinpoche, who was his root guru, had one day at the end of a teaching called Khenpo Dorje up to where he was seated in front of the audience, calling him Sena Dorje, Greedy Dorje. He called out, Greedy Dorje, come to me, I have something to tell you. Now, during the teaching, Khenpo Dorje had thought about his food supply and was worrying a bit because all he had left at that point was a lump of butter. He had no more tsamba, and he was thinking, well, what will I eat today? Well, I suppose I'll have to just gulp down that lump of butter because I don't have any tsamba. And he was a bit worried about his food while listening to the teachings. And as was said, at the end, Khenpo Rinpoche called him, calling out, Greedy Dorje, come here, I have something to talk to you about. And so he went up to the master, and Khenpo Ngakchung had said to him, "Well, you don't seem to have any tsamba available today, isn't it?" And greedy Dorje immediately understood that the master had known his thoughts and felt, oh boy, this was not very good. I was distracted during the teaching, losing sight of the body-mind and rather worrying about my food supply. And then Khenpo Ngakchung had said to him, "You do have a lump of butter, don't you?" And he said, "Yes." "Well, in order to purify your mind stream of the negative impact of your worldly mindset rearing its head while you're listening to explanations of the Holy Buddha Dharma, you should melt that lump of butter and put the liquid in a container and make a butter lamp offering of it while confessing the negativity of your mindset while listening to the teachings for the sake of purifying your mindset of this negativity." And greedy Dorje did just that, as he was instructed. And Khenpo Ngakchung also told him, if you do this properly, on the basis of the proper motivation, you will never have to worry again about your food supply. You will have plenty to eat, and good food will be readily available to you in the future if you do this confession properly. And so he did. So it's very important that one sees to that one's mindset isn't tainted by afflictive, obscuring states while listening to the teachings of the Buddha Dharma. And then we have the conduct while receiving teachings.
Pena Chödrak gnang la kande song yorsana. Tangbo Chö song king de mas jige ding ge la rong lu tongbo song ne shugo song.
Now, again, it's recorded in the scriptures that relate the lifetimes as a bodhisattva of Buddha Shakyamuni prior to his enlightenment. And in those scriptures, conduct is explained as follows. The first point instructs members of the audience to seat themselves on a seat that is lower than that of the spiritual guide giving the teachings, and the posture should be the proper. One seats oneself on a lower seat, keeping the body straight.
Nipate lunga yisum shishin dulwa cheba mato nyamu tang kandayang mandaro shidurchi gogyare songare.
And the second point instructs the listener to maintain, in terms of body, speech and mind, words, thoughts and deeds. A peaceful perspective where the mindset is in a state where the listener, to some extent, if not entirely, depends upon one's capacity, has tamed the afflictive obscuring states, meaning the listener doesn't sit there and think about, oh, so and so said that thing to me yesterday, I have to respond, or the like.
Somebody when sick in me song shave sick tenzola make ji chutsane marani makashe jla tenzamne chuji tobayina ta tel pe mesiba joanyong tonggrema to kaimi jega marwa pe tenna shin sick duzi de tongbore song game song kain being going to masonga
Pena joposhin tung ten yuksha.
Yeah.
Now, the third point says the following. It's about one's attention span, as it were. That is to be maintained throughout the teaching. Now, the example given is the following. Think about a person who hasn't had anything to drink for a couple of days. Now, when that person is giving water or any other liquid, don't act in the following way, namely just gulping down the water and then forget about it. Someone who truly appreciates having obtained water again would presumably, because of his appreciation of finally getting something to drink, would take one careful sip after the other while enjoying the effect of quenching his thirst. Similarly, pay attention to the words of the Buddha Dharma. Sip them attentively and carefully. Listen attentively. In the same way as a person who truly appreciates the water he's giving after a couple of days with no water, thinking of it as nectar. Think of the words as nectar that you consume with appreciation and attention.
Chödrak penna Chödrak la de Chödrak charsona de Chödrak de xieja ku chi dang tan la samna zan ma dong le yu yu ma.
So the actual point made here is, once the teaching session is completely, do not leave without then never ever thinking much about what was said. You're never really tasting the nectar of the words of the Buddha Dharma. You just get up, then you go home, go about whatever you go about doing, and then you don't much think about what was taught to you. Do not behave in this way. If one, on the other hand, again and again recalls the words that one heard in order to acquire a good understanding of them, then one will slowly taste the nectar of the words of the Buddha Dharma and end up with a state of change where understanding of the explanations or the words one heard can happen.
Lasso that in the chigi.
So that's all for today.
Sonam Daya. Tamje Zigbani, Tamne Yebe, Danam Pamje, Sheganaje, Balap Trubaye, Sigbe, Solendrova, Drolwater.